Jesse, I'm really sorry that I did this to you 2 months ago.
I'm not even Jesse.
Look, you didn't want to do the show anymore, so for contract purposes, you're Jesse now. Alright. Listen, man. When we did play the ending of episode 3, we actually did the timeline, and that happened. With good reason. I mean, at least we can park in the handicap zones now. You know what? You're right. I gotta make up for this. I'll free you from this world.
No, what? No, wait. I don't want
I'm
this.
looking out for the best
want
intents
this.
of our friendship.
I don't want to live.
Yeah, so, was that plot twist necessary?
No, not at all. Hey guys, thanks for coming to my Life is Strange episode 4 Dark Room review. That's nowhere near as badass as saying Chaos Theory, but I guess it'll have to suffice. Anyway, episode 4 Dark Room is the 4th episode out of the 5-episode series of Life is Strange. I've actually reviewed episodes 1 through 3, so if you want to see those reviews, I got you all set up. We got funny sketches. It'll be a good time. It'll be a good time. Anyway, Episode 4 is the follow-up to Episode 3, which took off of the cliffhanger that we had at the end of 3, which means Episode 4 had a lot to carry. Did it carry it well? Did the production hold up? Was the storytelling still good? We'll have to see by the end of this review. Okay, now let's talk about the production of Life is Strange Episode 4. Now, let me go ahead and say everything that I've said in my other 3 reviews, and both production and gameplay is going to be pretty fucking transferable, simply because it's the same episodic game. These are just the different episodes coming out. Now, with that being said, here are the few bullet points of the production. First and foremost, you still have the same amazing watercolor art style that I've loved from all the other episodes. It's still good here. And you also have the same amazing soundtrack that's still just as amazing as it was. Unfortunately, I can't show you the music here because it's copyrighted and I will get flagged out my ass if I show it, so you're gonna have to take my word on it. I wish you didn't. I wish I could give you an example of the music, but thanks to YouTube's broken system, I can't. So with those 2 things out of the way, let's go ahead and just talk about the general production-esque things on how it looks as far as the overall tone goes. Now, first and foremost, when it comes to how each area looks, it actually rises above what you would expect from a $5 episodic point-and-click game. It actually looks way more higher quality, there's way more detail in the faces, it doesn't look like a comic book like The Walking Dead did or anything else like that. Like, I actually really like the degree of production and how high quality it looks for the money that you're spending. Now, for that being said, it is a $5 episode, and it is going to show low quality in some areas. The worst cases of this is the rolled and flat textures when you notice them in abundance where they make certain areas just not look that great. It actually can dampen out the actual area as far as how it looks. And this has actually been a complaint for me across all 3 episodes so far, and it's still a complaint for me. Now, beyond rolled and flat textures, you also have the god-awful lip sync. That's not a deal breaker, but it is a noticeable problem. And lastly, the biggest production problem that I can really see is the stuttering in the frame rate when you're in loading screen cutscenes or first loading into an area. That's basically been with every episode after it's come out, but they've patched each episode thoroughly, so I'm not really worried about them actually patching this or getting it fixed. I know that they're going to fix it. They've had a pretty good track record of doing it, but it doesn't take away from the fact that this was in the game when it came out. It's a noticeable problem. Now, the last possible thing that I can talk about with this episode is the length. Now, surprisingly, this episode was longer than all the other episodes. I'm going to actually have to put a time staple of 2 to 4 hours instead of my 1 to 3. Now, the argument that I've made here as far as that gap in time being is, if you stick solely to the game, you're going to complete it in about 2 hours. If you only stick to the major stuff, you're going to have about a 2-hour playthrough, roughly. Now, that being said, if you actually go for all the photos, read the journal, do all the other extra stuff, you can squeeze out 4 hours out of this game if you really want to. So that being said, for $5, it's not ridiculous that it's only 2 to 4 hours. A matter of fact, this is actually longer than all the other episodes that were roughly 1 to 3, depending on the amount of stuff that you wanted to do. So that being said, the length's not a problem here. And honestly, when it comes to episodic point-and-click games, I'm actually perfectly fine with the time length being like this, simply knowing that the episodes are so cheap. Okay, well, let's talk about the gameplay of Episode 4, shall we? Anyway, the gameplay of Life is Strange is actually pretty much the same, and I'm only going to give you the few bullet points and direct you to my other reviews of the first 3 episodes if you want to know more. Life is Strange is very much an episodic point-and-click game where you're mostly just pointing and clicking and talking to people and making choices, and that affects the story over each episode. Now, the interesting thing with each story is that I can actually see it noticeably get different with the episodes depending on how you did some choices. Now, that being said, it's still genuinely having the same arc, but the choices do matter, and that's a pretty big step for me because I've seen a lot of games where the choices were just the illusion of choice. So the choice system actually works pretty good in my opinion. It actually works like it's intended to. Now let's get on to me the gameplay. Unlike most episodic point-and-click games, you have full-on third-person movement, so it actually feels like you're playing the game more than you actually are. But one thing to be worried of is that the movement actually is pretty hollow and it just gives the illusion of you actually playing the game way more than what you are. That being said, other than actually being able to move in third person, it's pretty much a good episodic point-and-click game. You still have your little side things that you can collect, like the photos, you can still read text messages, you can still read your journal, and there's a couple other extra things. But all in all, the gameplay is still the same great gameplay that I remember. Now, let's move on to the story. Now, how does the story fare for this episode? The answer, moderately well. Let me explain. Now, for me, knowing the amazing storytelling that we've been getting episodes 1 through 3, for it to only have moderate success in this episode is kind of disappointing. But it's not a deal breaker, but it does have noticeable problems with this story. Let me go ahead and dig right in. Episode 4 had way more to carry than all the other episodes because we had the plot twist of the third episode to deal with, we had all the answers to go get, and we basically needed to sum up almost all of the plot except for a couple things that were predicted in the first episode. Now, this is a lot for a 2 to 4 hour episode to really take on and tackle story-wise, so it kind of felt like you were being bombarded with information more than you needed to be. Now, I feel like if we had an extra episode in the roster, meaning that was a 6-episode season instead of a 5-episode, we could have dealt with this better. Now, let me go ahead and talk about the plot line that was wasted the most. I really wanted to see the most out of it, but was the biggest disappointment out of the episode for me. But before I do that, spoiler alert. Okay, with that little warning out of the way, let me go and tell you what disappointed me the most of this episode story-wise. For me, it was the alternate timeline and how they tackled that. Now, if you remember all the way back to the third episode, at the very end, Max created a completely different timeline by messing with the past and stopping Chloe's dad from dying. This created a completely dark and different future where Max was now in a different social ring of friends, Chloe was paralyzed, Warren was no longer interested in Max, and you were Oh god, I hate her so much where I can't even say her name. Anyway, you were her friend.
Thank you.
You suck, Victoria!
Preach it! But anyway, moving on. It created this whole new, stark and different universe that actually changed everything while still being the same, because it was still in the same area, the same characters were involved, but everything was entirely different. And I really wanted to see this plotline. I really wanted to see this completely fleshed out across the whole episode where you got to go to this new but different area that's still the same because it's the same area. I wanted to see that plotline completely fleshed out while still giving us cryptic answers to the real timeline. But no, we didn't get that. The alternate timeline amounts to you hanging out with paralyzed Chloe for the first little bit of the episode, then going back to your timeline and having one important choice there. Other than that, the alternate timeline may as well not exist. It literally could have been completely removed from episode 3 and episode 4 and it would have amounted no different, really. It would have been almost the exact same story-wise. So for me, it was disappointing that the episode didn't really stick to that timeline or didn't really flesh it out. I'm not against going back to the other timeline, I just wanted to see it way more fleshed out. Alright, now with that disappointment out of the way, how's the rest of the episode fare? The rest of the episode fares pretty decently, actually. You get a little extra scene that may or may not be there, depending on a certain choice that you make. You get the actual answer as far as who's causing all of this stuff to happen within the community and making all of these students go missing. You get answers. You get sufficient answers, and the ending still has the shock value that I wanted out of the episode, because, man, that ending was just like, whoa.
Whoa.
You said it, Neo. Whoa. So all in all, the story still handles itself different, but the biggest problem with the story is that it tried to bite off more than it could chew. Now let's go ahead and round everything out to the verdict. Life is Strange still has the same amazing art style and sound score, still has the technical problems that I've been bringing up since the very first episode, but those aren't deal breakers. The real thing that lowers this episode and all the other episodes to me is the simple fact that the story underperformed, because that's the most important thing when it comes to a game like this, and for it to drop the ball and fumble a little, it's kind of disappointing. It's still a good and solid episode, well worth the money, it just has a few disappointments in that area. Which is why I'm going to give episode 4 a 7 out of 10. It's still a solid episode, it's still well worth your time, but ultimately it does have some disappointments and it still carries the technical problems that have been there since the first episode upon each episode coming out. So now that we've gone through episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4, I'd say that my favorite episode so far has been 3, 4 has been a disappointment, and 1 and 2 were good foundational episodes to me. Now, it's going to fall upon episode 5 to at least end this series solidly, but I have no doubt that it's going to do so or end it amazingly, because ultimately a great series can still have 1 to 2 bad episodes and still be awesome. Like Breaking Bad, for example, had a couple episodes that I didn't really care for, but the whole series was still amazing. So ultimately, we're going to have to see how episode 5 ends out the series, and I look forward to seeing you in that review. Bitches.